Let me say by way of introduction, my name is Gretchen Rowe. I'm the homeschooling parent of 6. My husband and I have graduated 5 from college. The last one is a junior in high school, and I wouldn't have traded my 21 years of home academics for anything. I am beyond home education now. My son is in a public school and will graduate from there next year. But Amanda, who's joining me today, is still in the what my German dad would say, the mittendrin of it all. She's right in the middle of it. So I am bringing the best of the best to you. Both of us have had the opportunity to have children who learn differently. And so we're going to get to share a little bit of our experiences and maybe give you some guidance and some focus. Our ultimate goal here is to help you reset your heart and see that it's full, because when our hearts are empty, it's very hard for us to serve our families. So that's where I want to get started today. And Amanda, if you would be kind enough to introduce yourself, I'm going to go ahead and load the rest of the screens up here, I hope.
Absolutely. So I'm Amanda Capps. I have been in customer service with Demme Learning for the last 12 years now as a remote employee, broadcasting to you live from Northwest Arkansas. I am a homeschool mother of 8. I'm a second generation homeschooler. So that's a little bit unique in that I was homeschooled and graduated from homeschool. And then I am also homeschooling my own brood of 8. I have 4 girls and 4 boys. They range in ages from 19 down to almost 2, and every age in between. And I do have 2 very special different learners in my family. My daughter, Eva, who will be 13 this summer, and my son, Cooper, who is 10, just about to turn 11 in May. I'm married to my husband, Justin, and we've been married, oh gosh, almost 15 years now. And yeah, he's a firefighter EMT, so that just adds a whole nother level to our crazy.
And Amanda is the personification of grace under pressure as far as that's concerned. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to facilitate this conversation. So Amanda is going to be our primary presenter today, but I am never short of an opinion, so I'll have plenty to say. My differently abled learner, actually, there are 2 of them. My older son, Duncan, is 22 years old, about to be 23. And he was a diagnosed dyslexic. He didn't learn to read until he was 9.5. And he also had some neurodevelopmental delays. We actually worked with neurodevelopmental therapists for 5 years for him to help him succeed. And so I've got a little bit of personal experience in this. And then my son, Owen, who is 16, had some learning challenges crop up at puberty. And so we might talk a little bit about that as well. So I think Amanda and I have trod this ground well, and hopefully today, maybe we can help you all save some time. So let's begin. Amanda, I wonder if you could talk about knowing your students, because no one knows them like you know them. And I think I said in a webinar a couple of weeks ago that we read other people's highlight reels, and the ones that we should be most ardent at reading is our own children. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Absolutely. So I think in my journey and in my experience in talking with a lot of other mothers and families on a similar journey over the years, the biggest thing is no one is going to advocate for your child the way that you will. They were put in your family on purpose, and you have the privilege of guiding them in their journey. And if you're choosing to also embrace and take on their educational journey, that is even, more of an area and a way to be involved, in their lives and how they are going to really feel about themselves. That was one of the things that was really kind of heartbreaking to me. My husband was actually the first different learner in our family, and he was a late adult diagnosed ADD and dyslexic. And he was one of those kids that slipped through the cracks in the public education system. And so he had a lot of damage and a lot of negative tapes. And if you do much research into ADHD and dyslexia and some of the learning differences, the brain wiring differences, because unfortunately, mainstream education is geared towards a one way, one track. It only fits this type of learner. And that learner has to be good at test taking to make it and hack it in that system. And these kids just aren't. It's like trying to hammer a square peg into a round hole. And it leaves a lot of parents feeling very frustrated. It leaves a lot of kids feeling very wounded. The statistics out there are that, ADHD kids hear more negativity in their day than the average person. And that's a lot to overcome. And so that's why I think as parents, we can observe those things and we can create this incredible environment where they can actually thrive and be set up for success versus having to hear all those negative messages and feel like a failure of the system.
I think one of the things that is really important is for us to set as a boundary or a benchmark for parents is to recognize that sometimes what we as parents perceive as laziness is an inability to articulate, I'm having a challenge. And I often have this conversation with parents. I'm just coming off, in fact, I'm between two homeschool conferences. I was at one last weekend and I'll be at another one this coming weekend. And I had several conversations with parents who said, my son is just lazy. He's careless. He doesn't attend well. And I'm sort of making an amalgam of these statements. But what I want you to understand as a parent is we have learned that there really is no such thing as lazy. There is an inability to attend. And that could be for a wide variety of reasons. So it's up to us as parents to become the most ardent student of our students so we can figure out what exactly is going on. Amanda, I want this to be a combination of practicalities and thoughtful conversation. So with your different learners, can you give me a couple of tips of things that you use to set them up for success? So that I know you do things in smaller increments of time. I know that you do things more individually for them, which is hard in a big household. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So some of the simple things that we do, because they typically are not the best at time management. So I kind of have to teach that skill and kind of stay on top of as kind of like an overseer of, hey, this is taking, longer than it should, you're talking more than you're doing your work, those types of things. So a lot of it is just recognizing myself that they are not inherently trying to ruin our school day, but that actually they're just excited and they've got all of these things going on, and as they're working through something, they might get this idea out here and this idea out here, and of course, being the way that they're wired, they need to blurt it out, they need to switch gears immediately and open a new tab, and I might be like, okay, well, but wait a minute, we need to finish this tab first. And so just being guided, and then to not letting my own frustration enter the mix, like recognizing that they really are trying to give me their best, that they really are trying to maintain focus, that they are working 10 times harder than their neurotypical peer. So for me, a huge part, because I am so neurotypical and then have some neurodivergence in my family, I have to be very aware that I'm not trying to fit them into my box. I have to work with and be fluid and work with them, but we still have to maintain boundaries and we still have time constraints that we do have to follow. And so they have to give me that grace as well, that it's like, okay, well, we can't just always go out into orbit and circle the moon and come back. Like we have to get certain things done. And they have learned that if they will maintain focus, it doesn't have to be for like, it's not like I'm making them stay there for an hour. Like you said, I do shorter increments. So the ideal rule of thumb is a child's attention span is typically their age plus 2 or 3 minutes. So if you think about that, the younger the child is, the shorter the attention span, and it really doesn't gain a whole lot the older we get. I mean, I'm 40 right now, so 40 minutes, maybe 42 minutes is my max. So, just being aware of those types of things, keeping a little bit of an eye on the clock yourself, because they're probably not going to, and then structuring things where we're changing it up to keep things interesting and engaging. I try to work around a lot of topics that interest them. I try to gear our schooling around those subjects and those topics, because it helps to keep them engaged. So I'm always looking for an opportunity to go, okay, this is going to hold their interest, this is going to help them succeed, versus we just have to get this done and it has to be this way, and it doesn't matter if it isn't fun, because that's just miserable for everyone.
So let me circle back to what Amanda has said and give you 2 practical applications on ways to make that work. I had one of those children who was the goddess of the question. She was born with 1,000 questions, and she gained questions every day of her life. And she's still that way at 27. But when she was little, she was a very disruptive force in our homeschool. So I would give her at the beginning of the morning 5 poker chips. Imagine 5 poker chips in my hand. Every time she asked a question, or as Amanda has described, rabbit trailed, she had to give me a poker chip. And when she was out of chips, she was out of the opportunity to ask questions until I gave her more poker chips. That allowed her to think, okay, of the 100 questions I want to ask today, what are the really important ones? So that's creating a life skill, even at a 7-year-old level, of helping them begin to discern. Now, we have a colleague who has 2 little boys, and one is very neurotypical, and one is, Michael describes as off the charts, bouncy boy, hard to focus, typical boy. So what Michael does, in order to, Amanda said, keep your eye on the clock, he wants to facilitate allowing his son to not keep an eye on the clock, but to know that it's not an interminable amount of time. So what he does is he takes 5 Duplos and he sets them out on the table in front of his son. And he said, look, we're going to focus on this for 10 minutes. And every 2 minutes, he takes away another Duplo. And that allows his son to see there's a visual end to the time that he has to focus. And allowing that constraint to be very visual for his son allows him to stay engaged to the end of that 10 minutes. So I think those are some practical things that would be really helpful. Amanda, sometimes when we make the misapprehension that a child is lazy, can we talk about some of the physical things that might be going on that are not so readily apparent? I'd like to talk about hearing. I'd like to talk about vision. So can we start with what happens if somebody's not hearing properly?
So I've had a couple of my kids tested for auditory processing issues. I had a sister who had auditory processing issues. And so, yeah, a lot of times as a neurotypical, I tend to be too wordy, and that gets lost in translation to a kiddo that is struggling to process. And so trying to keep things short and succinct, maybe only giving one task at a time versus, there are kids of mine who are perfectly capable of me giving 3 items to and saying, I need you to do this, this, and this in this order, and they will do it. My other kids, they might get to the first one, probably get distracted doing the first thing, and the other 2 things are lost. So if I want to not feel like I'm wasting my breath or my time, I have to be aware of the fact that it's foolish for me to try to give them more than they can handle or more than they can hold on to. Another area that is super huge is working memory. These kids really struggle to hang on to what is going in. And then with the way that their brains are wired, they're also struggling to know, is this important enough to put into long-term memory? Or is this something that can be like in one ear and out the other? And a lot of times where the message gets scrambled is something important that should be staying in long-term memory, like facts or, dates or certain things that we would look at as them knowing and really being having mastered what they're learning. It's not making it to the long term, and it's going out, and they're frustrated. You can see the frustration. They know it. They know they should be able to recall it, but they can't. And so a lot of times we look for strategies and ways to modify how we're teaching, because all of these kids have a strength in some area. Typically, if the auditory is not strong, the visual is strong. If the visual is not strong, the auditory is strong. My kids who are dyslexic do fantastic with audiobooks, but putting them in front of a book and saying, here, you have to read this and you have to comprehend the information, and then we have to talk about it and you have to recall and pull it all, it would be sheer torture. They would be miserable. I would be frustrated, and we would really get nothing accomplished. Versus I can put them in an audiobook, put headphones on their head. They can listen to the book and almost repeat verbatim the information that I'm looking for from them, that shows me that they've retained it. But if I were under the delusion that the only way a child can really proficiently learn is they have to read that and they have to digest that information, and this is the only way we can do it, what good is that going to do them or me? And it's just really going to be frustrating all the way around.
It's kind of like teaching a pig to sing. It frustrates both you and the pig. So
Exactly.
I'm giving you a resource in the chat. It says learningally.org. And one of the things I think that is really important, particularly in Amanda's household. Now, I had 6 kids, but unlike Amanda, I had 6 kids over 18 years. And so that meant that I didn't have so many kids so closely grouped together. So I had a little bit more of developmental differentiation, I think would be the nice way to put that. But I could not be in all places at all times. And with my dyslexic learners, the challenge was I had to, very strong auditory learners, as Amanda has said, but how much can you really read out loud before you are toast? So what I want to encourage you is to take a look at this resource. It's called learningally.org. And if you have a student who has a diagnosis, you can avail yourself of Learning Ally. It used to be called Books for the Blind. I need to set expectations here. This is not Audible. This is not going to be different people using different voices in different characterizations. Everyone who reads for Learning Ally is a volunteer, and some people are more adept than others. But what Learning Ally did for me, particularly when we got to the high school years, is it gave me a source to find my son's textbooks so that he could have more than one input. So he could have auditory input as he read. The auditory input helped keep him on task, and I wasn't the one being the auditory input for him. So I think you'll find that to be tremendously helpful. The other thing that Amanda mentioned that I wanted to circle back to a little bit is being able to use more than one sense in the process. So Amanda, I know I've heard you say this before, but I want to make sure that we include this. I know when you give instruction, you don't just assume the instruction has been heard as you have given it. So can you talk a little bit about how you seek feedback from your different learners about, now, what did I tell you?
Well, and that even works with toddlers, because to be honest, you tend to say no, and then they say, but why? Or they repeat the question. And so having that parental sense of, what did mommy say? And so that is probably a phrase that I use more times a day than I want to really think about, but it's brilliant in its simplicity, because it gives your child the opportunity to say, well, this is what I heard. And then you can correct anything that was misrepresented or elaborate on something if it needs further explanation. But it just eliminates that confusion, and it eliminates the responsibility on my part of assuming that they are on the same page with me when they very well may not be.
Yes,
It works for
absolutely.
husbands too, by the way.
Yes, Yes, absolutely. Well, and I understand, I think, a little bit more of the insight of what it is like to have an attention deficit brain. I too have attention deficit. So in, and I should say as an aside, I was not as patient with my attention deficit children as I should have been. It wasn't until I was in my 50s that I was diagnosed. And if I had realized some of the things about being attention deficit that made academics difficult, maybe I would have provided my kids a little bit more grace. Toward that end, I want to share some really cutting edge research with you. For 15 years, I've talked to families about attention deficit disorder, and we all have to eat a frog every day. So we should start with the really difficult things and do those first. But what the current research in ADHD says is that we would be better off to get an attention deficit student to collaborate with us if we gave them the opportunity, as the research defines, to enter in. So we gave them the opportunity to choose in the beginning of their day what is something that they want to do, and they can begin with that, and then we can step to the more difficult things in our day. I think it's also important for me to say, as an aside, particularly if you're new to the homeschooling journey, you may assume that your academic day should look like a regular school day, and it shouldn't. The truth of the matter is, I had parents say to me this weekend at the conference I was attending, but they do mathematics for an hour in school. And I want to set that expectation accurately. They block an hour of time to do mathematics, but a good 45 minutes of that time is crowd control and feedback and things like that. The actual engagement in the process of the mathematics operation can be much shorter when you are in a one-on-one situation with a singular student. And I think that makes a tremendous amount of difference. When we list the, Tao, thank you for saying what you said. What was said was, please list the website. So the website that I was directing you all to is learningally.org. And it sounds just like, it reads just like it sounds, www.learningally.org. And if you choose to avail yourself of that organization, let me also suggest that in order to create your membership, you go through an organization called the Homeschool Buyers Co-op. And the Homeschool Buyers Co-op, if you Google them, you'll find their website. I don't want to mess it up by leaving a letter out, but they would entitle you to a substantial discount as a homeschooler to avail yourself of that particular enterprise. Amanda, I know you and I have both have children who have had visual issues. Can we talk a little bit about that and what it's like? Looks just like dyslexia, but has an organic cause.
Yes. So the fun thing about all of these things is, typically as you are getting a child diagnosed, you're finding adults in the lineage that suddenly are like, wait a minute, I do that. And I've always struggled with this. And so do not be surprised if either yourself, your spouse, or very close immediate family members, as you start learning about these things, don't come to mind and you go, oh, well, maybe that's why so-and-so was like that. They may or may not have had an official diagnosis, but that is incredibly common. So I already knew, based on my husband's struggles, that I needed to be on the lookout for vision-related learning challenges in my kids. And actually, my story is a little bit interesting in that I've been married twice. I was widowed very young. So my first two daughters were from that marriage. And one of those daughters, that husband had a diagnosis as well. He was diagnosed with Erland syndrome. And while that daughter didn't manifest in that way, she did end up needing vision therapy. I noticed when she started writing, she was reading well and she read young, but her handwriting had it was kind of just bizarre to me, because it seemed like each letter had a space between it that would have been a correct and appropriate space if you were starting a new word. But to her, they all looked together. Like in her mind, what she was writing looked right to her. But to me, as her instructor and as her mom, I was going, why are your letters so far apart? What is going on here? And so that was kind of my first clue. So she ended up being evaluated at the age of 7 because there were some reversals and like I said, then those gaps that were just kind of concerning to me. And sure enough, she had some tracking issues. It was a tracking thing, and while it wasn't really affecting her reading, it was definitely affecting her handwriting. And it was something that, 6 months of vision therapy remediated. She wore glasses for about 3 years. And then she was glasses free. Her handwriting, everything was fixed, and she was golden and was one of my better academic kiddos. So sometimes it can be really simple. There is no like crazy diagnosis that's going to be like this lifelong, oh my goodness, we're going to be dealing with this all the way through college kind of a situation. And then other kiddos, it's legit dyslexia. Vision therapy can help, and it has helped tremendously with both of my kids that were diagnosed dyslexia. But it wasn't as drastic of a fix as it was for my oldest daughter. Then the daughter after my son has had kind of the same deal as my oldest. She had a very short term of vision therapy, and she seems to be golden, and there don't seem to be any other issues, while my 12 and my 10-year-old still, they still have struggles. They still have to work harder. We worked almost 2 years on just getting Eva to consistently recognize letters of the alphabet prior to vision therapy. Like it was torturous for both of us.
One of the things the reason that I bring this up is because in the 115 of you that registered, many of you said, I have a child who has dyslexia. And what we want to encourage you is we're not diagnosticians, but in our role as customer success consultants, we often find families who have either a diagnosis of dyslexia or a suspicion of dyslexia, and they have not ruled out functional vision as a mitigating factor. So what Amanda and I are speaking about here is not, can your child see 20/20, but what we're referring is, can your child's eyes track across a page the way they're supposed to? Some of the things that might indicate a problem is, as Amanda has said, letters that are different sized or odd spacing or things like that. If they consistently can't follow a line, either they you put notebook paper and they're writing like this across what should be a line like this, or they're writing like this. If you see that with a degree of consistency, if you see a child who is amenable to begin school, and the longer you're at school, the less cooperative they are. If you have a child who's consistently car sick when they ride, all of those things might indicate a functional vision challenge. What we want to encourage you all to do is, as homeschool parents, we want the absolute best for our children. And we suggest that you leave no stone unturned. We suggest that you look for a functional vision therapist to do diagnostics. We may be whistling in the wind, but if we're not, all the dyslexic interventions on the planet are not going to move the ball for you in the same way that being able to consult with a developmental optician will. KB has said she has a daughter with processing issues, and they had to get a consult to get therapy, and she's now a college honors student. So let me encourage you all that is a tremendous way to be able to use what you know from your observation of your student to make their academic experiences a better one. We also have a question about what we would know and be able to comment about the Montessori method. And if you're familiar with Maria Montessori's work, it is a wonderful way to help a student enter in. I like to think of Maria Montessori's work as the stripes on the edge of the road, so you know where the edges are. And it's a great way to guide a student. You'll see many Montessori-esque principles in some of the things that Demme Learning offers. We try and strive, as the Montessori principle does, to bring as many senses to the table in any enterprise with a student. So we illustrate that well in math UC, in spelling UC, and now with our newest acquisition of Write Shop as well. We want students to be able to work through that content as expeditiously as possible. Dana, thank you so much for commenting. She says, we discovered vision issues at the end of my daughter's first grade year, and vision therapy was a godsend. She likely struggles with dyslexia too, but correcting vision has been helpful. My son, who is a diagnosed dyslexic, was told in fourth grade at his diagnosis that he wasn't college material and we should find him a good trade school. He holds a degree in computer science, and I will tell you, he has the auditory processing of a true dyslexic, in the fact that even at 22, I can't fire off multiple questions to him. I have to ask him one at a time. But he also needed vision correction. His younger, very neurotypical brother had no vision issues whatsoever until puberty. And then we discovered at puberty that he had some vision issues and we needed remediation. We're not diagnosing, we're just suggesting you be an attentive student of your student so that you can look for these kinds of things.
And can we just pop in really quickly here before we move on, that can be something, if you've had a child who's had some issues and they've been remediated at a younger age, it can need to be revisited when they do hit puberty. That happened with my daughter, Eva. She had a round of vision therapy when she was about 7, and it worked wonders and we saw great progress. And then suddenly she turned like 11 and a half. And I was like, wait a minute, we're really struggling again. What is going on? And because I had talked with you and you had mentioned that, I was like, oh, wait a minute, maybe we need to go get that reevaluated. I mean, she was doing her regular eye appointment, but we hadn't really looked at, hey, do we need to revisit vision therapy? And when we did, sure enough, our provider was like, oh yeah, no, we've had some regression and that's totally normal and it's not anything to be worried about, but we do need to go ahead and address it so that this doesn't continue to be an issue for her. And that made a real difference.
One of the things that several parents ask us is how do we sort through the whole of an academic day? And I think you have a couple of suggestions as far as how you structure your academic day. And I think that would be helpful to parents. I also think it's important to say, we take a look at what a school offers as far as academics, and we try and replicate that at home. And it doesn't have to be that way. So Amanda, can you talk about the sorting the necessary from the nice in your household and what absolutely has to get done versus what would be nice if it came along with the opportunity?
Absolutely. So while my kids would love it if we started with arts and crafts, that's just going to get us into the weeds right off the bat. I'm always going to make sure that we're getting the basics: reading, writing, and math. We are going to get those done regardless of what happens or how the day implodes. I will say I do feel like I have a little bit of an unfair advantage because I grew up in a homeschooling environment. So I don't bring those
shoulda, wouldas.
well, and I don't bring that reference to school. Like, school to me looks a lot like what I'm doing. So, because that was my experience. And so that is definitely helpful. And so I do try to encourage parents that I engage with through customer service when they seem to be really stressing or like, oh my goodness, we're not getting to everything. And I'm like, don't try to do everything every day. You can pick and choose days. You can have a day in between. You can take a day off. You can do a 4-day week. If you want Fridays off and you want a 3-day weekend, I mean, that is the beauty of homeschooling. You have so much flexibility at your disposal, but so much of the time I talk to parents who seem terrified that if it doesn't mimic what they have already, preconceived a school day is supposed to look like, or modeling school at home. We are homeschooling. We are not bringing school home. So I try to encourage them to just chill and let things kind of flow organically to an extent. I mean, that can get crazy pretty quickly, but there are some very practical things that I do to make sure we're getting everything done. One, we school year round. We take shorter, more frequent breaks throughout the year because that works better with our life. I will lose too much ground if I take a big summer break with my kids. We know as parents, there are very hot days in the summer that nobody wants to be outside doing anything and they would rather be in the air conditioning. And so we can assign some reading. We could do, you know, 10, 15, 20 minutes of math. And that's not going to bend anybody out of shape. It's not going to impact anybody's plans, you know, for what they want to do for the summer. And it's really painless. Also, if that's all they've ever known, they're not probably going to give you a whole lot of grief about it. Secondly, I work around the child that is the oldest first. They are my most intentional input because they have the least amount of time left. And so I feel like I have to be as intentional as I can with them first, and then everybody else in the family down to the littlest ones. So a lot of times with my littles, so like I have a 5, a 3, and an almost 2-year-old right now. And so I may not even like, if the 5-year-old doesn't want to do school that day, I'm not going to push it. I'm not going to try to fit it in around everybody else. But there are some days where he's very consistent and he does. And so we'll pull it out. And to him, school is like the most fun thing ever because he has a lot of say in what's happening. And I'm not stressing, thinking, oh my goodness, if we are not doing this every single day with him, you know, I've always been a proponent of better late than early anyway, because that's the way they're structured and the way their brains work. And so, you know, and don't discount what they're picking up through osmosis. I mean, you would be amazed what younger children, because we're kind of that one room school room or one room teens are doing and hearing. And I mean, it never ceases to amaze when I hear a voice pipe up from the back seat. Yeah, when we were talking about, you know, the Pilgrims on the Mayflower and the year, and I'm like, okay, they were paying attention. I thought they were playing Legos or coloring, but they absolutely were listening to what we were doing.
I think that makes a tremendous amount of difference. And here's an observation that has been made, which I think is
fantastic.
terrific, is regarding year-round school, especially with kids with ASD, consistency is comforting toward that end. And I'm so glad that that was said, because
Amen.
the consistency has to come from you as the parent. Kids don't wait. If you're not prepared, they can't produce. So if you are starting a project that requires a pair of scissors and a glue stick and a pencil, before you call them to the table, you should have those 3 things sitting at the table. Sometimes it's just us having the capacity to think proactively, how are we going to have this student engage? There's 2 things that I want to talk about based on commentary that you all made when you registered. One of them is anxiety. Anxiety can look like a lot of things. Anxiety can look like obstinacy. It can look like anger.
Yep.
It can look like that frozen in fear response. And it is up to us as parents to be able to help our children quantify that. And I know, Amanda, you've had some teenagers who have voiced that. So can you talk a little bit about how do you help a child correctly identify their hesitancy in a situation as possibly anxiety?
Absolutely. So there are lots of situations that, you know, can come up in a school day where, you know, depending on how you're administering the information, like if I give Eva a test and I'm like, here, it's a 3-page test. I want you to do this. She's going to lose her mind. Now, if I take that same information and I sit down and I just start giving her those questions verbally, she's going to sit there and she's going to pop off answers and she's going to get she'll ace it. My husband is exactly the same way, which is one of the things that has been so frustrating to him in his career, because so much of the fire industry is built on testing. And that's one of my biggest frustrations with our regular school system. And even within the homeschool community, there are certain states that require standardized testing, and testing only determines how well you test. It doesn't really prove what you know, because it's so formulaic in the way that it is presented that there's really no room for any sort of helps or aids. And so when he has had the courage to ask a supervisor, hey, I really have these struggles. I can't read and process the information fast enough. Can I take this test orally? Suddenly he's passed tests with flying colors and he's advanced. But let's be real, it's hard. And it's even harder as an adult to ask for help than it is to ask for help as a kid. And sometimes a kid doesn't even know what they're struggling with or why they're not able to process the information. That has been one of the most invaluable back and forths for me is Justin as an adult can articulate what my child is experiencing. And so do not discount the involvement and the feedback from the adults around you that may have the same struggles, because they can verbalize things that your child is sitting there going, I know I have an issue. I know I'm frustrated. I know I'm acting out in some of these behaviors. But what the root is I don't know. I don't have the words. I can't verbally tell you what I'm seeing and what I'm struggling with. And Justin was able to say things are moving on the page. Words blur. There are dots. Lines move. A kid is seeing what they're seeing, and they don't necessarily know to even describe and say, hey, this isn't normal, because it's all they've ever seen. As he got older, he heard other kids not describing it that way. And he was going, well, wait a minute, this is what's happening for me. Maybe this isn't normal. Maybe this isn't what everybody is seeing. Or like my poor mother who, got glasses in 8th grade. Prior to that, she'd always been set at the front of the classroom so she could read the board fine. But in her 8th grade year, they put her in the back of the room, and suddenly she went from an A student to a D student because she couldn't see the information on the blackboard. Corrective lenses, she was nearsighted and she was fine. So, I mean,
sometimes that's really hard for us as parents to discern when we're sitting there with our student. Frances has asked a really good question. She says, this is our first homeschool year. How can I work if my daughter is behind? She's 11 years old and is performing at the level of a 3rd grader. I'm trying to push her to reach school level. Do I give her more time or do I keep pushing her? And Frances, I'm so glad you asked this question, because the truth of the matter is, when you homeschool, she's behind no one. And you are in a singular tutorial environment. So you and she together are exactly where she is. Now, the reason that we say that is because we often have parents who come out of a school environment, they have a child who has gaps that need to be filled, and they're anxious about filling those gaps because they want to keep the playing field level. Our parental anxiety about our children's perceived gaps can create that anxiety response in our children. So I would like to encourage you that wherever she is, she is. Yeah. And if you have conversation at 11, she's the perfect age to say, how do you think we could do this more effectively? And allow her to collaborate with you. And often I have this conversation with parents and they say, oh, my kids had such great ideas. It never occurred to me to ask. There is a boundary where we need to be the adult and they need to be the student. But engaging in that collaboration as much as possible makes all the difference in the world. There's another side to this coin of anxiety, and that is perfectionism. Several of you mentioned that. And there are reasons for perfectionism. One of them is I don't want to have to do it over. So if I can't do it right the first time, I'm not going to do it at all. Second of all, I have listened to a couple of really interesting blogs recently that have said that perfectionism is caught, not taught. So children see us as parents modeling perfectionism, and they think, oh, I should imitate that. And so we have to be content in front of them with the mistakes we make in order to give our children the latitude to feel like they can make mistakes. And I recognize as a recovering perfectionist, that is a really difficult thing to
Guilty.
address. And Amanda, you have a wonderful resource here in Dorinda Wilson, the Unhurried Homeschooler. Can you talk just real briefly about that? Because I think that's an important thing.
She really saved my life because, yes, I am that perfectionist type A mom. And so, even as a homeschooler, you're still like just a little bit like, oh my goodness, are we ever going to get there? Like, are they ever going to get their times tables? Are we going to be doing times tables in high school? Like, is this, something we're ever going to feel like we're gaining ground and we're getting past? And at that particular junction in my homeschooling, I started kind of branching out and looking for some resources and looking for some feedback from other moms. And let me tell you how valuable that is. Your community is so huge. Look for moms with big families, with lots of kids who are doing it successfully or that you admire, and ask them how they do it. And then utilize their ideas and I mean, they've already, don't reinvent the wheel. They've already been through, all of it and have probably, experienced what you're struggling with and would be happy to offer you a tidbit or oh, this is what we did, or, think about this. This might work for you, or this book, or this resource, or this blog, or whatever it may be. So don't ever discount availing yourself of mentors and community in homeschooling, because the most dangerous place to be as a homeschooler is isolated, where all you can see is everybody's highlight reels on social media where they're doing the crafts and they're doing all of the sports and and their homes look perfect and the meals are cooked and from scratch. I mean, come on. The reality is I have 8 kids. I work part-time. Almost everything we eat is either in a paper bowl or on a paper plate because I do not have time to do that many dishes. I don't want to spend that time doing dishes. I need to be intentional with my time and engage with my kids. And one of the ways I have found to do that is to budget in for paper products that we use and dispose of. And I may not be doing great on the carbon footprint, but you got to do what you got to do. And so look for those ways and those opportunities. So she was one of the ones that, came up when I was really searching for some support and some answers and some guidance. And it was like a breath of fresh air. It was like,
That's
I'm
great.
stressing for no reason. And she just had such incredible insights. She was so calm and peaceful and relaxed. And I just have eaten up everything by her since. And I love her.
That's wonderful. And I love that we can offer that as a support to our families. We're coming to the bottom of the hour here, so I want to make sure that we offer a little bit more practical advice. One of those things that I think is really important for you as a parent to recognize is sometimes as parents, we inadvertently weaponize the outcome. And what do I mean by that? I can say to my child, your room is messy, go clean your room. But particularly if I have a child who's neurodivergent, in other words, ADD, dyslexic, has a dys, whatever it may be, that clean your room can be, I don't even know where to begin. So to help keep them on track and to help keep you from being disappointed in them, how about instead saying, look, today I would like to accomplish cleaning your room. Here's what this is going to look like. The first thing I want you to do is I want you to go around the room, pick all the books up and put them back in the bookcase. When you've done that, I want you to come back to me. Once that is done, then say, great, you've done an awesome job. Praise carries the day in any given situation. So remember to praise their effort, not their outcome. The next thing I want you to do is say, hey, here's a laundry basket. I want you to go pick up everything on the floor that looks like a piece of clothing. And if it's dirty, put it in this basket. If it's clean, put it on your bed. Simple direction, singular focus. That way, you're going to be able to help them stay engaged in the process. Because as adults, we look at, okay, this room has to be cleaned. I'll do this, 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 and this. but we have to model that one thing at a time for children. And it makes a tremendous amount of difference. Lindsay's asked a great question about how can I help my ADHD 8-year-old not be distracted by her 2-year-old sister who's sitting right next to her when we do math and English. Amanda?
I use nap time. If I've got a highly distractible kid, then and littles, which I do, I'm going to sit down with that child while the little ones are napping, because it's too much. It's overstimulating the 8-year-old. It's probably me getting onto the 2-year-old to shh and be quiet, and it looks like and if they've given up naps or they're too old to nap, you as the parent can enforce quiet time. I have quiet time at my house for kiddos that are older. So I have a one almost 2-year-old that naps. I have my 3-year-old who's still napping, but my 5-year-old Christopher is beyond naps and will very rarely fall asleep in the afternoon, although it does happen sometimes. But he's allowed to play quietly with Legos, or but he has to stay in his room for 30 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour, whatever time limit you want to set on that. And bear in mind, it needs to be reasonable for the child.
I'm going to interrupt you because you didn't start with 45 minutes. You started with 10 minutes and taught him how to get to 45 minutes. So I want to make sure that parents don't go, well, you should be able to stay in your room for 45 minutes. No, I'm going to go back to Michael's example of those Duplos. You can have a 3-year-old who plays on the floor next to you. I'm going to set 5 Duplos out here in front of me. Sister and I are going to be busy together, and I'm going to take 1 Duplo away every 2 minutes. And when all the Duplos are gone, then you and I will talk. But as long as there's Duplos up here, you have to be quiet. And that gives you the latitude. We assume that kids can make decisions based on what we have in our life experience. And everything has to be taught. And so that is so important for us to be able to help our kids stay on task by teaching them what on task means. Even if it's just one day, Lindsay, you've got to be able to celebrate. Today, we managed to get this done. And I'd be very praiseworthy of my 3-year-old. And I would be very praiseworthy of the child who stayed with me. The 8-year-old who, despite his or her distractibility, stayed engaged with that process to the end. Amanda, we are almost to the very end, and I'm looking for your final comments, but I really don't want to leave this session without talking about time blindness. Can you explain that, please?
So this is something that a lot of people, I'm not gonna just say kids, because I know lots of adults that struggle with this as well. It's not really having a good grasp of what your time parameters are. So this can look like a couple of different things. This can be, I leave way too early for things because I don't want to be late. And so then you're not being as effective with your time because you're always early everywhere. And it can also look like I got hyper focused on something, lost track of time, and now something that I should have only been doing for maybe 10, 15, 20 minutes, maybe even an hour, has suddenly bled into, I haven't eaten lunch, I haven't showered, I need, all of these things are happening, and, dumpster fire in the house, and I don't know which end is up, and I've got to figure out what to make for dinner. So, those are the things that can kind of derail adults and kids. If you talk to my kids, they're going to tell you that they're absolutely positive that cleaning the kitchen takes 4 hours because they hate it and they drag it out. And typically 3 of them who have been tasked with specific jobs will be so busy delegating and policing the other person doing the job that no one's getting anything done, and I'm losing my mind.
There's a dozen parents who are going to watch this who are going, really? That happens in your house too?
Oh, all the time, all the time. So anyway, so some of it is having to put those parameters. So a lot of times I will be right next to that child for at least one session, and I will say, okay, we're cleaning a toilet. This took 6.5 minutes to do properly. And I'm going to walk them through. Another thing that I do, and I have found to be absolutely invaluable, is lists. So when they're little, you can use pictures with check marks. When they're older and they're reading, you can do written instructions and check marks. But if I can give my son something that he can go back to and reference, because again, short-term, long-term memory. So I may have said, hey, I want you to clean the bathroom. These are the tasks that instigate a clean bathroom to my standards. I've done the work of lining that out for him. Another thing that I have seen parents use that is fantastic when you were talking about the clean room thing is when the room is clean and everything is in its place, take pictures.
Yes.
Then you can send that child and say, I want the room to look like this when you are done. You have 30 minutes to complete this. It shouldn't, and be realistic as well. You know, you need to be aware of time and be realistic as well. If it's really going to take 45 minutes, don't set them up for thinking it's going to be 30. And if it's really only going to take 5 minutes, exactly. But those are all ways that you can either visually, or my husband works well off lists, my son works well off lists. I mean, he just needs something he can come back to and re-jog his memory and go, oh, right, yes, this is the next step. And I got distracted.
And
get back on
toward
task.
that end, I have to tell you, I have a list for what does a clean bathroom look like? And if you open up the medicine cabinet in any one of the 4 bathrooms in my house, that's where the list is. Because the lists will disappear because people don't want that to happen. So if they're stuck up inside the medicine cabinet in the bathroom, I can open it and say, okay, you've done 1, 2, 3, and 5. I still need you to do number 4 as far as the list is concerned.
And you're not the bad guy. You're redirecting to the list. It's not mom's on my case and she's harping on me again. It's right here on the list. I've done the background work, and you just
we've come to the end of our time, Amanda. I can't believe it's gone very quickly. I wonder if you have any closing thoughts for our parents today.
I would just say that you are your child's best advocate. You are your child's best noticer. The best thing that you can do if you suspect a diagnosis or you have a diagnosis is do your research, read the books, listen to the audiobooks, learn about it, and try to really develop your understanding of exactly how their brains work, how they're interpreting and receiving information, and then don't fight against that, work with it. And so that your homeschool and your family and your experience and your relationships can blossom and grow and really be what you're wanting, which is a richness of, you know, these experiences versus I feel like I have to get all this done. I'm feeling overwhelmed. No one's cooperating with me. We're all burnt out. We all hate each other. I mean, that's not the goal. I mean, that's totally the opposite of what we're working for. And so sometimes just by being a really well-researched parent, by really employing the tools and the accommodations and the resources that are out there, it can very drastically change everybody's experience for the better.
I think those are wise words I would like to leave you with. Thank you so much for joining us for the last hour and for trusting us with this information. If we have said anything that prompts in your mind the desire to have a further conversation, our customer success team would love to have a conversation with you. You can reach out through us. You can to us. You can also visit the Demme Learning website and contact us through chat. We're more than happy to help you in any situation to have success in your homeschool family. Sometimes you just need a 5-minute conversation with another adult to say, I'm really not crazy, am I? And we're happy to be that adult for you. Thank you all for joining us today. We hope you'll join us again in the future. And we wish you the joy of the homeschool journey. Some of the days are really long, but trust me, the years will pass very, very quickly indeed. Thanks, everyone. Take care. Have a blessed day.